I was jolted by the news that my husband had been rushed to the hospital. As I burst into the treatment room, the gaze of the doctors, nurses, and my husband all converged on me. The sudden silence was almost palpable, but when our eyes met, I was relieved to see that he was stable and not in immediate danger. However, what happened next was astonishing. My name is Tanya. I'm a 30-year-old nurse, and my husband, Steve, who is 2 years older than me, works for the government. What drew me to Steve was his seriousness, a stark contrast to my previous boyfriends. Perhaps it's my nature as a nurse or my inclination to care for others, but I find fulfillment in helping people, whether it's lending money or offering support. It's something I've always done without much hesitation, even though I knew I probably shouldn't. Many of my nursing colleagues share this trait, and relationships often come up in our conversations. Then came a pivotal moment in my life. I met Steve on a blind date arranged by some fellow nurses. His quiet demeanor and serious nature intrigued me, and I felt an immediate attraction. While others found him too serious or unremarkable, I was drawn to him. I took the initiative to exchange contact details and asked him out. Our relationship flourished over 3 years, marked by harmony and trust. Unlike many relationships that fizzle up quickly, ours was strong and enduring. When I suggested we get married, Steve proposed, and we tied the knot. Steve, with his limited dating experience, preferred reading and gaming at home over socializing. Though he rarely ventured out, his love for books made for endless conversations, and his reserved nature only added to his charm. Steve isn't much of an outdoors person, but he seems to have a thriving online social life through gaming. We often play games together while chatting online. Since we started dating, Steve has mentioned that he's had more opportunities to go out. He's found that having someone to accompany him makes the experience more enjoyable, even though he was initially reluctant because he didn't have anyone to go with. My in-laws live about 2 hours away. They seemed like kind people, but since Steve is the youngest of 3 siblings and his parents are quite elderly, we don't visit them often. After meeting them at our wedding, we've only seen them once more. During the new year, we exchange gifts at mid-year and year-end, and I try to call them, but my night shift work makes it difficult to find a good time to chat. Steve and I make the most of our time off together and share household responsibilities. I thought everything was going well. However, about 3 months ago, I noticed a shift in Steve. One evening, I came home to find him asleep on the sofa with a beer can on the table. "You'll catch a cold sleeping here," I said, waking him up. He groggily rubbed his eyes. "Isn't it unusual for you to be drinking beer and sleeping here?" I asked. "I was at an online drinking party with my gaming friends. I got carried away and drank too much," he explained. Though I didn't quite understand his online world, I was willing to let it slide as long as he was enjoying himself. But this was a mistake. Similar incidents followed, and then I noticed something else. Steve's hair had changed. "What's going on with your hair?" I asked, surprised to see it dyed brown and styled in a way he'd never done before. "Is this acceptable for your job?" I questioned, remembering he had mentioned strict regulations at his government job. "What's wrong with it?" I decided to start enjoying myself more while I'm still young. "Do you like it?" Steve's sudden change was surprising, especially since he wasn't the type to focus on fashion. "I'm not sure if it suits you," I said honestly. It wasn't that I disliked the change, but I wasn't used to it and wasn't sure it suited him. I see," was all I managed to say. A few days later, Steve got his ears pierced. I wasn't sure if it suited him. It almost seemed like he was going through a midlife crisis. I wondered if he might be struggling with something else, perhaps related to his jaw. "Hi, what's going on with you lately?" I finally asked, unable to hold back any longer. He gave me a vague response. "Nothing." Then he retreated to the bedroom. I knew this situation couldn't continue, but with the recent retirement of a colleague, my workload had increased significantly, leaving me little time to focus on Steve. Around the same time, Steve mentioned, "My dad hasn't been feeling well, so I'm going home for the weekend to check on him." Given that my father-in-law is elderly, I understood Steve's concern and agreed. From then on, Steve began leaving every weekend. I tried to show my support by cooking for him and sending texts while I was at work. but his responses were sparse. Just as I was planning to discuss things with him, I received an unexpected call at work. "Tanya, the police need to speak with you," a colleague said, handing me the phone. "Police? Why?" I asked, my heart racing. The officers informed me that Steve had been in an accident and was being rushed to the emergency room. "What? Is he okay?" I demanded, my voice trembling. The officers reassured me that while Steve's injuries were serious, they were not life-threatening, and he had been taken to the hospital where I worked. I hurried to the emergency ward, found the nurse, and rushed to the treatment room. When I opened the door, everyone in the room looked up at me. "Excuse me," I heard my husband was brought in. The doctor's expression was serious, and the nurse seemed troubled. I felt a pang of anxiety, but when I saw Steve's face, I felt a wave of relief. The nurse briefed me on his condition. He had a severe leg injury, and they had to cut off his pants to treat him. As I looked at Steve again, I saw his pants had already been removed, and the medical team was working on him. As I stood there, my husband suddenly yelled, "Tanya, don't look at me." "What?" I was taken aback. As a nurse, seeing injuries is part of my job, and I found it odd that he'd be embarrassed about his pants being cut off due to his injury. It's standard procedure when clothing can't be removed normally. "Just leave," he shouted again, but I was frozen, unsure of what was happening. Despite his shouting, the doctors and nurses continued their work with urgency. They couldn't afford to delay the treatment by responding to every request or concern. Then something caught my eye. "What is that?" I murmured to myself. On the inside of Steve's right thigh was a tattoo. The injury they were treating was on his left leg, but the tattoo on his right leg was clearly visible. Fortunately, the right leg seemed undamaged, so my attention was drawn to the injury on his left leg. The tattoo featured a name, apparently a woman's name. "What's this about?" I wondered aloud. I could see Steve was disturbed by my reaction, but I stepped aside as the medical team continued their work. I spoke with a fellow nurse in the emergency ward, who revealed that Steve had come in alone. She mentioned that he was brought in with a woman of similar age, who had been in the accident with him. Her name was Yasmin. The name matched the one in the tattoo. Could this mean Steve was having an affair? I couldn't stop questioning everything. My coworker described the woman as having brown hair, pierced ears, and a tattoo of Steve's name. It didn't add up. I spoke to the nurse who treated the woman, and she confirmed that Steve's name was indeed tattooed on the woman's inner thigh. It seemed clear now they were having an affair. I found it shocking that someone would have a cheating partner's name permanently inked on their body. It struck me as a sign of instability. As these thoughts raced through my mind, I remembered the call from the police. They had first contacted my in-laws, but since they couldn't drive, they were given my contact information and called me directly. I decided to check in with my in-laws. When my father-in-law answered, I asked, "Is Steve going to be okay?" I reassured him that Steve had been in an accident, but was stable and receiving treatment. My father-in-law's voice clearly showed relief. So I asked, "By the way, Dad, have you been feeling better?" My father-in-law seemed puzzled. "What do you mean?" he asked. I explained. "Steve mentioned that you weren't feeling well, which is why he's been away every weekend. He said he was looking after you." To my surprise, my father-in-law was in good health, and there were no recent issues. It turned out Steve's claims were false. But where had he been going if not to his parents' house? If it wasn't visiting them, it must have been to meet his mistress. Yet, I had no concrete proof. After finishing my shift, I went home, leaving Steve at the hospital where he was staying overnight. I decided to search through his belongings thoroughly. It didn't take long to uncover damning evidence, photos of him with a woman, hotel receipts, and an email confirmation for a romantic resort reservation. It became clear that their accident occurred on their way back from this resort. The crash happened on a mountain road. Unfortunately, neither Steve nor Yasmin was in critical condition. Still, with Steve's leg injury, it was a situation where, as his wife, I should have been concerned about his well-being. I no longer felt any sense of empathy. The realization that Steve had lied about visiting his parents to cover up an affair with another woman was a harsh blow. I began to wonder if his recent odd behavior, dyeing his hair and getting his ears pierced, was influenced by this woman. I confided in a fellow nurse. who referred me to a divorce attorney known for handling such cases. The next day, I brought Steve's belongings to his hospital room. He appeared disoriented and couldn't recall the events from the previous day's treatment. To be honest, I had lost interest in the details of his accident. I left the hospital without speaking to him, as I had a shift to attend. After work, I met with my lawyer and explained the situation. With the evidence I had gathered, he had assured me that I had a strong case for divorce. I was determined to end the marriage as quickly as possible. I couldn't bear the thought of sharing a space with Steve again after such betrayal. My anger had eclipsed any sadness I felt. I found a new place to live and moved out, leaving only Steve's belongings behind. I planned to wait until he was discharged from the hospital before finalizing the divorce. Although I considered filing for divorce while he was still in the hospital, I decided against it to avoid complications at the facility where I worked. When Steve was ready to leave the hospital, I drove to pick him up. "I need to make a quick stop. Please come with me," I said. He looked at me with confusion, but agreed to follow. We went to a family restaurant near our house, where the lawyer was waiting for us. Steve, still adjusting to standing on his injured leg, looked bewildered by the situation, but I was focused on the task at hand. Steve sat down silently, and I thrust the divorce papers toward him. "Divorce? Why?" he shouted, his voice edged with panic. I took a moment to compose myself, my anger barely contained. "Why? You had an affair. You even had your accident on a romantic trip. I found evidence of your infidelity in our home. And on top of that, you lied about your father's health to cover up your trips to see this woman." Steve's face went ashen. "You think I'm naive? Yasmin, the woman you were involved with, has been discharged from the hospital. Her injuries were less severe than yours. I can't believe she was brought to the same hospital where I work," I said with a bitter smile, watching as his color drained further. "You'll be held accountable for the pain you've caused me." I handed him the divorce papers and a pen, but he didn't take the pen. "Is it just your leg that's injured, or have you lost the use of your hand as well?" I said, my voice laced with sarcasm. Eventually, he picked up the pen but hesitated, staring blankly at the paper. "Why are you hesitating? Afraid of facing the consequences of your actions? Do you think this is a game?" Steve seemed taken aback, as if my words had struck a nerve. I glared at him coldly. "Are you kidding? I can't stay married to someone who has their mistress' name tattooed on their body." His eyes widened in confusion. What are you talking about?" "You really don't remember," I retorted. "I saw the tattoo on your inner thigh when you were rushed to the emergency room. You were yelling at me not to look. But seriously, what kind of man tattoos his mistress' name on himself? Even if we didn't get divorced, did you think you could hide this from me?" I said, watching my husband's jaw drop in shock. "Oh, that's not it," he stammered, trying to defend himself. I sighed, feeling a mix of frustration and disbelief. "Dyed hair, pierced ears, and a tattoo with the name of the woman you cheated on me with. At least have the decency to get these after our divorce." During his hospital stay, I unexpectedly came face to face with Yasmin. It wasn't intentional. We simply crossed paths. She was wandering around, looking for the gift shop, and asked me for directions. "The gift shop is just around the corner," I said. Enter Yasmin." "Right. My husband is Steve," I added, noting her reaction as she read my nameplate. Her face turned pale, and she fled at an astonishing speed for someone with injuries. "Please don't run in the hospital," I called after her. It seemed she was more embarrassed than I was. She must have heard from Steve that I worked here, but hadn't expected to encounter me in such a large hospital. It was almost ironic. My husband claimed he wanted to start over with me rather than with someone he supposedly loved enough to get a tattoo of. I asked Steve directly if Yasmin had left him. He seemed to believe I'd never find out, and apparently preferred to endure our marriage rather than face the possibility of alimony. It's hard to believe he thought he could keep this hidden with her name tattooed on him. Ending our marriage wouldn't erase the fact that he had betrayed me. While it's common for nurses to attract problematic men, I had hoped Steve, with his serious demeanor, would be different. His decision to get a tattoo of the woman he cheated on me with was the ultimate betrayal. I feel foolish for not seeing it sooner. And now, I'll leave the rest to the attorneys and hope to never see him again. The lawyer gave me a nod and said, I've moved out, so you'll need to find your own way home. Goodbye. My husband looked at me with a pained expression, his mouth hanging open. He would likely be struggling with his leg injury for a while, but it felt like justice. The divorce proceeded smoothly, and I received alimony, which left Steve financially devastated. To his further dismay, Steve discovered that Yasmin was married to a colleague of his, someone he had randomly encountered through online gaming. Her husband also filed for alimony. Adding to Steve's woes, I heard that Steve ended up quitting his job, and the gossip about his downfall kept spreading. As for me, I received my alimony and remained indifferent to Steve's job situation. After the divorce was finalized, my former in-laws reached out, clearly upset. After I explained everything, they apologized and assured me they would never let Steve harm me again. Word of the situation spread among my fellow nurses, and they mostly found it amusing. I couldn't help but laugh along with them. And now, I live on my own, free to enjoy life as I please.